At the crossroads of continents and civilizations, at the crossroads of history, a light shines through the darkness of the ages, to stand as a guidepost of preservation and perseverance, through the sunny days of greatness and glory, through the suffering and torment of the longest nights, though flickering in the worst of weather. That light burned into the present age of shadow, when so many others, once exalted, are but dying embers, or have already fallen forever into darkness. The Armenians can rightly claim to be one of the oldest historically attested and continuous peoples in the world. And though that history has been far from easy to endure, they persevered, beating the odds in a region rife with war and conquest that saw the end of many great civilizations. Where is the original heartland of the Armenians, about which so much of their most recent history is concerned? Where did they come from, and how old really is their civilization? The first nation to proclaim itself Christian. Who are the Armenians? Hi friends, I'm Kevin McLean. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and consider supporting me on Patreon, PayPal, through YouTube Super Stickers, or become a member of the channel. You can also follow me on Facebook and X. Thank you all so much for your support. Since our earliest sources, the heart of Armenia has been situated atop a volcanic plateau in the South Caucasus, with an average elevation of 1,800 meters above sea level, and named for the people who dwell there, the Armenian Plateau. It's cut through by dramatic valleys and lofty mountains, like the awe-inspiring Mount Ararat, the backdrop of beautiful Yerevan. Out of this stunning terrain emerged the Armenians, who have dwelt there from such an ancient time that they might have been born from the very stones of that land. The early origins of the Armenian people are cloaked in a heavy mist of prehistory. The Armenian language belongs to the Proto-Indo-European family, though how the language came to Armenia has been intensely debated. In the past, it had been argued that it belonged to the Balkan branches of Indo-European, such as Greek. Some theories even propose that the Armenians originated in the Balkans and later relocated to their historically attested lands. An ancient Greek account by Herodotus of the Armenians was used to support this. The historian and first ethnographer said, "The Armenians, who are settlers from Phrygia, were armed like the Phrygians." Herodotus's claim should be viewed skeptically. Though it is thought that the Phrygians did migrate from Thrace into Anatolia during or after the downfall of the Hittites, there doesn't seem to be a clear link between the Phrygians and the Armenians. Recent linguistic studies now generally agree that Armenian is in a branch all its own, with no other known members. The silver bullet that explained the origin of the Armenian language came in the 2022 paper by Iosif Lazaridis et al., The Genetic History of the Southern Arc, a bridge between West Asia and Europe, where it was found that beginning in the Middle Bronze Age, there was a sizable introduction of steppe ancestry into the region of the Armenian highlands. One of the samples, a man of Tavshut, Armenia, dated to around 2000 BC, was of steppe origin. The telltale marker being that he possessed around 10% Eastern hunter-gatherer ancestry, which was not at all local to the region, but which forms a core part of the Yamnaya-related steppe admixture. The man was found in a burial of the Trialeti Vanadzor culture, named for Trialeti in Georgia and Vanadzor in Armenia. Archaeological studies have shown that they had a socially stratified society, performed horse sacrifices, and had a pastoral-focused economy. Many of the dead were cremated, but they also had lavish burials for elites, sometimes with carts buried with them. It had previously been thought, based on cultural similarities, that they were of Indo-European origin, but now it's genetically confirmed. The most likely scenario is that the catacomb culture, a slightly later development of the Yamnaya, began to spread south, with some groups seeking new lands in mountain pastures and highlands, possibly being pressed by the rise of others like the Shrubnaya. They were the last of the steppe cultures to predominantly carry the male haplogroup R1b, which is commonly linked to the spread of Indo-Europeans from Yamnaya, whereas the later Indo-Iranian cultures were predominantly R1a. The Kura-Aks culture in the Caucasus shows some signs of Indo-European settlement around 2400 BC, which likely contributed to the culture's rapid demise. Rising out of its ashes was the early Kuragan culture, followed by the Trialeti Vanadzor. This early Kuragan culture represented the introduction of the steppe culture into the region, while the Trialeti Vanadzor was its further development as it adapted to the region and took on local influences. These herders from the north, beyond the near impassable mountains, were the key progenitors of the Armenians, as the core of their language descends from them. Throughout the Bronze and early Iron Age, there was a fairly high degree of steppe ancestry in the Armenian highlands. By the late Iron Age, the percentages had begun to drop due to mixing with the local population, most likely the Urartu. Among the modern Armenian population, the steppe ancestry has decreased further, but it's still higher than among other Indo-European groups in the region, such as the Iranians. Of course, the Armenians likewise carry the legacy and influence of other groups, most especially the Urartu, from whom the language is believed to have acquired many words, and to whom modern Armenians can trace a good deal of their genetic ancestry. At least some of Armenia's early folk religion is crystallized in their history. The earliest source is the Armenian historian Movses Khorenatsi, who lived between AD 410 and 490, and studied under the inventor of the Armenian alphabet, Mesrop Mashtots. He tells the story of a hero named Haik, a name likely derived from the name of the people, Hay, and related to the country, Haik, now Hayastan. In Christianizing fashion, he is made a grandson of Gomer, son of Japheth, son of Noah. Haik was a greatly skilled warrior who moved south from the frozen lands and reached Babylon, where they were building the tower. At that time, the Titans ruled over the world, led by their leader Bel, and Haik would not live under his command. He ventured north from Babylon to Mount Ararat, where he conquered the local population, and then moved north and established a village named Haikashem. Bel sought to bring Haik under his power, and he assembled an army of his Titans. Haik, however, being a great archer, was able to fell the giant, and his army scattered. Bel was buried in a place referred to as the Graveyard Hill. The hero lived out the rest of his days as ruler, after which his son Aramaneok took power, and he and his two brothers Kor and Manawaz divided the land between them and originate the separate clans. In Armenian folklore, the constellation Orion is the hero Haik with his great bow. His defeat of the giants and his stature as the progenitor of the Armenians likely means that he was earlier understood to be a god. The structure of the story closely follows other Indo-European examples of a progenitor having 3 sons. Movses Khorenatsi was a euhemerizer, and therefore cannot be relied upon unquestionably for a correct picture of pre-Christian beliefs. In their own language, Armenians called themselves Hay, or Haik in plural, explained as being named after their founder, but more than likely the other way around. It appears to have its roots in the Indo-European word poti, meaning master or ruler of the household, hence Armenian Heirik, meaning father. Possibly this name is related to a Hittite-era confederacy, the Hayasa Azi. They are attested in ancient Hittite records as dwelling east of the Hatti, and roughly situates their kingdom in regions later known to be Armenian. How they come to be called Armenians is also not entirely clear. In Babylonian they were called Urartians, while in Old Persian and in later Greek they are known as Armenians. Opinions are divided as to its etymology. Possibly it's related to an Akkadian word meaning wasteland, with thick woods being called Armahu. Early Armenians must have been in close contact with the Hittites. A surviving treaty between the Hittites and the Heasa exists among the surviving records of the Hittites, and linguistic research shows some borrowing by the Armenians from the Hittite language. One of the Armenian words meaning God, Astvas, is believed to be of the Anatolian branch, from Asu Tiwas, meaning the good God. Tiwas is etymologically cognate with the Norse god Tyr, Latin Deus, Gaelic Dia, and Greek Zeus. Asu is related to Luwian Wasu and Celtic Su, meaning good. Yet it was not all treaties and friendship. The Heasa were also frequent opponents of the Hittites, and their kingdom was eventually defeated by the Hittite king Mursili II. Though not long after, the Hittite kingdom itself would fall into ruin. Between 1500 and 700 BC, the Proto-Armenians are represented in archaeology, at least in part, by the Lachish Metsamor culture. Developing out of the earlier Trialeti Vanadzor, they carried on elements of steppe culture while also engaging in the construction of great Cyclopean fortresses, cities, and mysterious standing stones. In Assyrian and Urartian texts, at least some of these early Armenians seem to be known as Etiuni. Urartian texts mention 4 kings of the Uduri Etiuni, likely a tribal confederation. Uduri is related to the word water, and may have referred to tribes dwelling near Lake Sevan. We only know the name of one of their kings, Diasuni, thought to be cognate with the Greek Diogenes or Diogenes, meaning God-born. Their lands were to the north of the Urartu, from at least the shores of Lake Silidir to the region around Lake Sevan, and most of what is now North Armenia. They had a difficult relationship with the Urartu, whose records report various wars. Argishti I, king of Urartu from 785 to 753 BC, conquered much of the Etiuni lands and established the Erebuni fortress in what is now Yerevan. The name of the city is in fact derived from the fortress, which developed into a powerful center. This makes Yerevan one of the oldest continuous cities, around 2,800 years old. Argishti also founded the city of Argishti Kinali. Its ruins are near the present town of Armavir. An inscription found at the foundation of the site reads, Argishti, son of Menua, speaks. I built a majestic fortress and gave it a name from my own, Argishti Kinali. The land was wilderness, nothing was built there. Out of the rivers I built 4 canals. The vineyards and the orchards were divided. I have accomplished the deeds there. Argishti, son of Menua, mighty king, great king, king of Bianili, ruler of Tushpa. That the Urartians may have been at least in part Armenian is suggested by the name of the king who founded Yerevan, Argishti. It's very similar to a Greek name, Argistis, meaning bright. Beginning in this period of apparent Urartu dominance, a cultural shift is noted in the archaeological record corresponding to the 6th and final stage of the Lachish Metsamor culture, which represents a fusion with the Urartu material culture. This also seems to have corresponded to physical mixing of peoples and the decrease of steppe ancestry. Many Urartian words were incorporated into the Armenian language through this process. For a short time in the 700s BC, Urartu was the strongest kingdom in the region, but increasing raids by the Cimmerians and the Scythians, and battles with the Assyrians led to growing weakness. Several cities, such as Argishtikinili, were believed to have been sacked and destroyed by the Scythians. Yet it was their near neighbor, the Medians, who would take advantage of it. By 590 BC, the Median Empire had grown to truly great proportions. They had helped destroy the Assyrian Empire and brought together many of the Iranian peoples of the region. The Urartians were overcome, and following the Median conquest, their language disappears. This may suggest that the Urartian language only represented an elite ruling group, which went into decline after their political defeat. Yet the Medians themselves would not last long. In 547, the Achaemenid Empire, an Iranian empire emerging out of the Persis region under the leadership of Cyrus the Great, conquered the Medians and gained control of Armenia. Along with the Persians, or possibly even earlier, came the religion of Zoroastrianism. While there's a lot of interesting theories about the pre-Iranian Armenian religion, they're far from reliable and may not refer to the religions of ethnic Armenians. When Armenia emerges into the full light of history, its religion was primarily influenced by Iranian traditions. Aramazd is Ahura Mazda, Anahit is Anahita, Mihir is Mithra, Tyr is Tyr, and Vahagan is Verethragna. Yet they were not worshipped in quite the same way as the Persians did. Vahagan especially seems to have been a powerful national god with aspects of the Indo-European thunderer. He was equated with Heracles, considered a protector of travelers, and had myths about defeating dragons and creating the Milky Way out of straw he stole, leading to it being called the Way of the Straw Thief. A fragment of a story about his birth is recorded by the ancient Armenian historian Koronatsi. In travail were heaven and earth, in travail too the purple sea. The travail held in the sea the small red reed. Through the hollow of the stalk came forth smoke. Through the hollow of the stalk came forth flame. And out of the flame a youth ran. Fiery hair had he, I too. He had flaming beard, and his eyes, they were as suns. It was thus something of a fusion of Armenian folk paganism and Iranian Zoroastrianism. Yet this religious fusion shows the powerful and long-lasting influence of Iranians upon Armenia. Through most of its history, Armenia would be governed by dynasties that trace their origins to the Achaemenid Empire and Iranians. When Persia fell to Alexander the Great in 331 BC, the satrapy of Armenia came into the possession of the Macedonian Empire, and when Alexander died, there was a brief period of local rule before it fell under Seleucid control. The Seleucids expanded the Greek influence in the region. King Orontes IV, ruling from 212 to 200 BC, styled himself a Philhellene, and had large bronze statues of Zeus, Artemis, and Heracles, representing Aramazd, Anahit, and Vahagan, installed in Greek-style temples built for them. City layouts and architecture began to fuse Greek and Iranian elements. But the Seleucids grew weaker with every year. Following the Battle of Magnesia in 190 BC between the Seleucids and the ever-expanding Roman Republic, some believed it was the perfect chance for Armenia to liberate itself from foreign rule. Greek historian Strabo informs us that men named Zariadres and Artaxias had been appointed as the military governors of Sophene and Armenia respectively. After the Seleucids lost the war against Rome, Artaxias was proclaimed king of Armenia, and Zariadres became king of Sophene. An inscription found in Armenia strongly suggests that Artaxias was actually a son of Zariadres. He proved to be one of the great and capable leaders of Armenian history, and began the Artaxia dynasty, which also has a pretty epic flag. He founded the city of Artaxata, known as Artashat today. He struck out and expanded Armenian territory, with the Kura River becoming the northern border. The Armenians became powerful enough that the Carthaginian leader Hannibal briefly obtained refuge there. Following the death of Artaxias, his son Tigranes I was forced to become a vassal of Parthia, and to give over his son Tigranes II as a hostage to be brought up in the Parthian court. The deal was to prove fateful. Upon the death of his father in 95 BC, Tigranes II, commonly known as Tigranes the Great, was allowed to return home and take up his rule as the king of Armenia. He married his daughter to the son of the king of Parthia, likely as a sign of loyalty, and proceeded to consolidate his power at home, and to give his support to Pontus as they fought the Romans in the Mithridatic Wars. He was given the crown of Syria and became its protector, and then he conquered Phoenicia and the last of the Seleucid states. Under his reign, the kingdom of Armenia would reach its most powerful point in history, stretching from the Caspian Sea to the Mediterranean, but it would not last long. When Mithridates VI of Pontus was defeated by the Romans, he fled to Armenia and sought refuge. Rome demanded his expulsion, but Tigranes refused. Roman general Lucullus launched an attack so suddenly that it took Tigranes by surprise. He was forced to flee north to gain time to assemble an army. While Roman sources claim that they bested Tigranes' army of 70,000, Armenian sources record a victory. In either case, the conflict dragged on for 2 years, with Lucullus's troops becoming increasingly insubordinate, until he was eventually recalled to Rome. But Armenia's hopes would turn to despair when in 67 BC he was replaced by the ever-competent Pompey the Great, tasked with the submission of Armenia. Tigranes, who was already very old, offered to surrender. Yet Tigranes was allowed to stay on as king, as Rome intended to use them as a buffer. The details of this history are important to understand for the formation of the Armenians, and their much wider geographical location in the past, and the tragic events which were to come. Roman historian Strabo records that the Armenian expansion and unification led to a common language throughout the region. That language was Armenian. Strabo, living between 64 BC and AD 24, was well placed to know the ethnic character and languages of the region, being a native of Pontus. His father fought in the Mithridatic Wars, and he was born just following the death of Tigranes. When Strabo speaks of the spread of the Armenian language over the region, he doesn't just mean the small region of modern Armenia. Much of what is now eastern Turkey was at that time Armenian, and their presence extended as far south as the Mediterranean. Much of this was not new settlement, but extended back to the Bronze Age. Under the expanded Armenian kingdom, many of these people had finally been united in a single political entity, if only for a brief time. The Romans were at war with the Parthians, and Armenia was being dragged into the middle. Artavasdes, son of Tigranes the Great, strove to keep Armenia out of it. This was interpreted as treason by the Romans, and Mark Antony had Artavasdes arrested and brought to him in chains, all the way to Egypt. When he refused to render homage to Cleopatra, she had him decapitated. His son Artaxias II fled to Parthia, and he would hold a grudge. When he was able to reclaim the Armenian throne, he killed every Roman in Armenia. For 100 years, Armenia was locked in a constant power struggle between East and West, Roman and Parthian, and later Roman and Sassanid, with leaders swapped in and out every few years, with Rome finally emerging the temporary victor in 298 under Tiridates III. It was the Roman-backed Tiridates who would adopt Christianity as the state religion in 301, making it the first state on earth to do so. The story goes that a Parthian assassinated the Armenian king Khosrov II, the father of Tiridates III. In response, the man and the rest of his family were executed, all but his infant son, who was brought away to Cappadocia by his caregivers and raised as a Christian. As a grown man, he returned to Armenia, and, as his father had done before him, won the trust of the king and got into his personal company. However, when he refused to make sacrifice to Anahit, Tiridates had him tortured. Eventually, his identity became known, namely that he was Gregory, the son of the man who killed Tiridates' father. The king had him thrown into a pit, the Kor Virap, and there he dwelt for 14 years, maintained, as some say, by Tiridates' sister. When the king went mad and became like a boar for his sins, Gregory was asked by his sister to heal him, which he did. After this, Tiridates and his court accepted Christianity, and Gregory became Saint Gregory the Illuminator. Of course, there is also a secular way to understand this. The adoption of Christianity may have been a political tool to drive a wedge between the Zoroastrian Iranians and the largely Zoroastrian-adjacent Armenians, and thus reduce Iranian influence. They established the Armenian Apostolic Church with Gregory at its head, and they immediately began to tear down pagan statues and desecrate shrines. The Garni Temple, the best preserved of its kind in the region, and thought to be dedicated to Mihir, survived the destruction. But that was because it was turned into the summer house of Tiridates III's sister. In recent decades, a move to restore the Armenian folk religion has met with success, establishing a professional priesthood. In 387, much of the Armenian territory fell back under Iranian control, and in 428 they moved to force the local population to adopt Zoroastrianism. This sparked a major rebellion where a greatly outnumbered Armenian rebel army faced Iranian immortals and war elephants. Yet despite their defeat, the Sassanids decided to grant them permission to retain the Christian faith, impressed by their sacrifice. Nevertheless, some Armenians migrated west into Byzantine territory. Despite the hardship, the Armenians clung to their identity, strengthening it. In 405, St. Mesrop Mashtots created the Armenian alphabet, and along with it came a flourishing of Armenian culture. Nearly every town in Armenia has a place named for him. The language became increasingly used in higher circles, and the influence of Armenians within the Eastern Roman Empire grew. In the Byzantine-Sasanian War between 602 and 628, Emperor Heraclius reclaimed almost the entirety of Armenian lands. The most striking thing of all is that Heraclius was Armenian himself. His father was born in Byzantine Armenia and served as general. Heraclius's grueling war with the Sassanids was more than Byzantine politics. It was personal. He wasn't the only Roman emperor to be of Armenian origin either. Misizios, following him briefly, was of Armenian descent, as was Artabasdos and Leo V, nicknamed by chroniclers the Armenian. And there are numerous others suspected of having Armenian ancestry. For a brief flash under Heraclius, Armenians were once again united under the umbrella of the Roman Empire. But as with the tragedy of fate, it was but a lightning flash in the night. Just as Heraclius had won the war for Armenia, the growing caliphate in the south saw their chance to strike. With both the Iranians and the Byzantines weakened from decades of war, the newly formed Islamic Empire, full of fresh religious zeal, was winning victory after victory against the Romans. By the time Heraclius died of illness in 641, the Byzantines had lost control over much of the Middle East and North Africa. The Arab conquest came with Islamic rule, which saw reduced rights for Christian Armenians. There were repeated large-scale Armenian rebellions over the next few hundred years, and with the growth of the Khazars to the north, they were now not only caught between west, east, and south, but north as well. By AD 885, during the weakening of Arab rule in the region, the Armenians were again able to assert independence, developing several separate Armenian kingdoms between the 9th and 10th century. This led to a massive revitalization of Armenia, with a population boom and expansion of Armenian cities. But by the 11th century, Armenian lands would once again find themselves largely under Byzantine control. It was shortly after this that history would take a brutal turn against the Armenians that would ripple through the next 1,000 years. Beginning in 1064, the Seljuk Turks began to invade the region from the east. When they secured victory over the Byzantines in the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, not only Armenian lands, but much of Anatolia came under their power. The victory began a long period of Turkic migration and Turkification of Anatolia, and that ethnic change is reflected in the present populations of the region. Facing oppression, many Armenians fled south to a small bastion of Byzantine rule that had an Armenian community, Sicilia. The Armenian relocation there had already been underway for a long time, but was greatly accelerated after the Turkic conquest of their lands in the north. When local Byzantine control of the region collapsed, Armenians established political dominance, and by 1198 it became known as the Kingdom of Armenia under Leo I. For a time, it was a center of Armenian cultural life. They would prove strong allies of the Crusader states. In 1375, the kingdom was overrun by the Mamluks, and Armenian control was lost. Yet many Armenians continued to reside there into the 20th century, until the darkest chapter of their history. From that time until the 20th century, the Armenians had no state of their own, but lived mostly under Turkish or Persian control. A glimmer of hope for national liberation would scarcely be seen until 1828, when the lands of what is now Armenia came under Russian control following Russia's war against Persia. A treaty was likewise signed between Russia and Persia for the relocation of all Armenians within Persian lands to the Russian-held territory in the Caucasus, and for the release of Armenian captives. The agreement seems to show a desire on the part of the Russian monarchy to protect Armenian Christians and to help them establish in at least part of their former lands. An estimated 100,000 Armenians relocated from Persia, and another 100,000 from Ottoman-controlled lands. The Armenians in Russian territory were now under Christian rule, and though they did not have self-government, the arrangement was preferable to what had come before, but they were still spread throughout the totality of their historic territories, and things were taking a dark turn. In 1878, most of the Balkans had been liberated from the Turks after the Russian victory in the Russo-Turkish War, as well as a sizable piece of territory in the South Caucasus. There were many angry Turks who saw Armenians as a fifth column, especially as they had begun to protest for greater rights. Starting in 1894, the Sultan Abdul Hamid gave arms and free rein to Kurdish bandits and others to carry out attacks against Armenians. These became known as the Hamidian regiments. They stole food supplies, livestock, and killed whomever they pleased. Armenians reacted by organizing militias for self-defense. They were confronted and defeated by the Ottoman army, and interpreted Armenian actions as defiance of the state. European governments, horrified by the treatment of the Christian Armenians, pressured the Ottomans into signing a reform to curtail the powers of these armed groups, but it was never implemented. Many nationalist Turks were inspired by a particular part of Sharia law, which they believed instructed that if Christians attempted with the aid of foreign powers to overstep their privileges, their lives and property were to be forfeited. They believed it was not only their right, but their duty to kill Armenians, and kill they did, with between 80 and 300,000 Armenians murdered. In 1914, the Ottomans, allied with Germany, launched an attack on Russia in the Caucasus. It was a decisive Ottoman defeat, but the defeat was blamed entirely on the Armenian support for Russia. The Ottoman government decided that they couldn't win the war unless they got rid of the Armenians, one way or another. Mass deportations were initiated by the Ottomans for Armenians who were not in the war zone. Those that were in the war zone were subject to killing. Alongside this was a general mass chaotic violence against Armenians, forced Islamization, sex slavery, mass property confiscation, and other acts of cruelty which attempted to erase the presence of Armenians. The state issued a decree that anyone harboring an Armenian without permission would be executed. Between 600,000 and 1.5 million people were estimated to have died, either from the deaths of the forced marches in the deserts, rampant mass killings, and starvations. By 1918, the Russian government had been overthrown by the Bolsheviks, who were forced to make major territorial concessions in order to exit the war, including ceding territory that they had won in the Caucasus during the 1878 Russo-Turkish War. These lands were inhabited by Armenians, Azerbaijanis, and Georgians. The people of that region refused to accept a return to Turkish rule, and declared independence, forming the Transcaucasian Democratic Federative State, which lasted approximately 1 month. It dissolved into violence in the Republic of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia. Refugees from Turkey flooded the new Armenian Republic. At least 200,000 died of starvation and disease. An armistice was reached with Turkey, but Turkish troops had burned crops and were blockading food supplies. By 1920, they were back at war. The completely unprepared republic had no chance against the Turkish army. Defending as best they could, they had to flee the city of Kars, and tens of thousands of civilians were killed. The only thing that stopped the total conquest of Armenia and the continued genocide was the intervention of the Bolshevik forces. Some would say that they arrived more as an invasion force than as heroic liberators, but the following day, when the pro-Bolshevik forces in Armenia declared Armenia a socialist republic, most saw it as the only way out. The treaty they had to sign was hard for them to bear, though it saved them. It ceded all claim to much of the historic Armenian lands, cities, and towns where most inhabitants had just fled from. To this day, Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Pakistan deny the Armenian Genocide ever took place, while states as diverse as Russia, the United States, Sweden, and Syria have passed legislation recognizing it. The Armenians had survived, though they had lost much. Under Soviet rule, they were able to maintain themselves and their language in relative safety, though it may have been stifling. Yet since the fall of the Soviet Union, things have not been easy. In the waning days of the USSR, ethnic conflict burst to the surface between Armenians and Azerbaijanis. Armenians had a long-time ethnic majority in the region of Nagorno-karabakh, but it was considered an autonomous oblast of the Azerbaijan SSR. In 1990, Armenians voted to leave the USSR. Azerbaijan followed suit in September of 1991, and by November, they had passed a resolution to dissolve the autonomous status of Nagorno-Karabakh, and this led to the establishment of the Republic of Artsakh and an all-out war between Armenia and Azerbaijan. By 1994, Armenia had managed to secure Azerbaijan territory between Nagorno-Karabakh and Armenia. The territorial gains were never recognized legally internationally, but from that time until very recently, it was a self-governing part of Armenia. In 2020, Azerbaijan went on the offensive. Armed and backed by Turkey and Israel, they cut through Armenian defensive lines using modern tactics of drone warfare they appeared to have been well trained in by their allies. Russia stepped in to negotiate an end to the conflict and managed to secure a deal which saw Russian peacekeepers maintain Nagorno-Karabakh and the Lachin corridor, but ceded the other territory which Azerbaijan had recaptured. In 2023, Azerbaijan began blockading Artsakh. Then they initiated a full-scale attack. The small republic, cut off from outside aid, and inexplicably unsupported by Armenia, was forced to surrender, and nearly the entire Armenian population fled the region, likely fearing a repeat of what had happened 100 years earlier. Many in the Armenian community asked and are asking why this was allowed to happen the way that it did. Yet, with the same perseverance, courage, and dedication to their history and identity that they have always shown, the Armenians can weather the storm, just as the snowy peak of Ararat, and write a new golden chapter in the history of their amazing, inspiring people. Well, I hope you all liked the video, and if you did, please like, share, and subscribe. Please support the channel through Patreon, PayPal, YouTube Super Stickers, or membership, and check out the merch store for channel-related content. You can find me on Facebook or X. Thank you all for watching and for your support. And as always, stand tall.